Mingtan. Thank you. So we'll start recording now. Now, I would like to invite our first panelist to speak for us. She is Karani Baroka. Brani is a Mindan-Japanese writer and artist from Jakarta, whose work has been presented widely internationally and centers disability justice as anti-colonial praxis. Among her honors, she has been modern poetry in translations, integral poet in residence, and a UNFPA Indonesian young leader driving social change and associate artist at the National Center for Writing in UK. So Oka's books include Indigenous Spices and Stars at Whispers, Deaf and Disabled Poet Write Back as a co-editor, 9 Actions. Her latest book is Ultimatum Oraguntant, and it's shortlisted for the Babalian Prizes. So she is a frequent public speaker. Oka's most recent talk was on eco-ableism for Women of the World Festival 2022 at Royal Festival Hall. So may I welcome Cleanis to join us and to be with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Eleanor and Sisters of Frida. Thank you to the BSL interpreters and to everyone else here. When I gave that talk on eco-ableism, I asked the room, who here has heard of or knows what eco-ableism is? And I think I got maybe 3 very tentative hands. Nobody really had heard the term. But as many of us disabled women know, it's quite prevalent. So I'll give you a few examples. One is in sort of atomizing the environmental crisis to personal decisions rather than going after the 100 or so corporations that are responsible for the majority of greenhouse gas emissions. I know there are people in our community who have to use plastic straws to survive, to eat, to drink, have been targeted unfairly. Rather than having the companies attacked or, like looking for alternative solutions and acknowledging that disabled people need to use plastic straws, some of us. So that's one example. And the second example is looking to a wider scope. More and more disabled people are created every single day due to pollution that is carcinogenic, that causes people to be born disabled, creates disability in later life. One example of this from Indonesia, where I'm from, there was a recent report that there's nickel mining in Indonesia that causes a disproportionate amount of a certain chemical that was also the subject of the film Erin Brockovich, if you remember that. It is that chemical that is carcinogenic, causes health problems, etc. And so I was thinking about, okay, well, there's this huge push towards green energy and electric cars and quote unquote clean transport. But all of that requires mining, lithium mining, nickel mining, copper mining, and all of this mining activity is deeply destructive to Indigenous communities. A third example that I'm going to give is that Indigenous peoples, a disproportionate number of Indigenous peoples are disabled. And I think we can see this broadly across different marginalized groups, that in each marginalized group, there is a higher number of disabled people than in non-marginalized groups. So you are attacking, when you are taking Indigenous people's lands from them and burning rainforest, you're also attacking large populations of disabled people, which a lot of people don't necessarily think about. And then the fourth thing I would like to say is that I like to cite Jasbir Puar's book, The Right to Maim, because it really shows that, imperial practices by the West and other countries, China, etc., even in Indonesia, that claim, okay, we're going to give accessible facilities to our citizens. It comes at the cost of all the lives that are killed by war due to weapons manufacturing by our countries, due to policies that maim and kill in places like Palestine. So when you think about disability justice, you need to think about where is the money going? And all of these wars, by the way, the US military is the largest non-corporate polluter in the world. All of these wars are also deeply, deeply environmentally destructive. And then the last thing that I just think I'm going to end with is in my book, Ultimatum Orangutan or Ultimatum Orangutan. I'm trying to show the cover, but you can't really see. It's a purple cover. Oh, and also my apologies. I forgot to describe myself. I'm an Indonesian woman with a patterned house dress or dastar on. I have purple lipstick on and earrings, and I have short black hair, and the background is green grass that I've put on a virtual background. Apologies. So this last sort of concept with regards to eco-ableism and how we're all interconnected, and particularly in terms of disability and deafness, is that there is the tendency for environmental justice issues and climate justice issues to be spoken of from a very Western white perspective. So in my book, I cite Indigenous scholars and communities who say that, this concept of the word Anthropocene is not new. It's not from 100 years ago. It's not from the Industrial Revolution. You need to count Anthropocene from the beginnings of European colonization, because we have already lived through genocides. We have already lived through mass environmental destruction. That is what happened to Native Americans. It's what happened to Native Canadians, Indigenous peoples in Australia and all around the world. There are constant remnants of genocide and continued genocide and ecocide that have been happening not as recent, not just recently, but for hundreds and hundreds of years. And there are people who have fought against the taking of their land to be used as places to make profit for colonies for hundreds of years. This resistance is not new. And the people who have been resisting all along, particularly Indigenous peoples, need to be at the front line, not just because the West is finally going to be impacted by climate change and then suddenly, all the activists come from the West. No, there are people who knew this was going to happen. Millions and millions of people who've been fighting for hundreds of years. And if there's anything that I would like people to take away from, it is that disabled people need to be at the front line. Disability justice is climate justice. Indigenous peoples need to be at the front line and centered, because in climate crisis, disabled people will be the most affected, right? It is difficult enough for us to survive in places that have not yet been hit by climate crisis, right? Imagine, and many of us do already live in places that have been hit by climate crisis, particularly in the global South, right? So we are already being disproportionately affected, and we will continue to be disproportionately affected. And yet panels from the UN that are not accessible, climate change policies and plans and contingency measures that are not accessible and don't center disabled people are still the norm. So I hope that all that can change. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Alka. Thank you so much. I am mindful of time, and I would like to take this opportunity again to thank you, our BSL interpretation from Sunrise and Nikki Evans. Thank you so much for you guys' help. Now, I would like to invite our second panelist, Asha Hans. So let me introduce Asha a bit before she starts sharing. Asha is a former professor of political science and women's study at UCAL University, India. She is a recent member board of UN Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. She's also the member board Women Enable International in USA. She is the founder of SMRC, a disability organization, and Women with Disabilities India Network. She has worked with CDOC and UNCRPD community on women with disabilities in India. Her recent books are in 2021 and Gendering Climate Change Learning from South Asia, and forthcoming, there will be a forthcoming disabilities and climate change. And in 2020, Asha Hans also had a book related to disabilities, gender, and the trajectory of power in Japanese action. So I would like to welcome Asha to join us today.
Thank you, Carmen. And I've already been introduced, but to say what I am today, I'm wearing glasses, I have very short hair, and I'm an Indian, so I'm brown, and I wear a sari. And you'll have to stop me when I speak very fast, because I have a tendency to do that. Thank you. And thank you to Eleanor, all of you, for inviting me. I'm so happy to join you today, because climate change has been a passion for so many years. And as Karina said, what is happening in Ukraine, we are reaching a stage where already the IPCC report, sixth assessment report, and the Secretary General had called it code red, that there is no going back, that where climate change is concerned, we've reached a stage where we need to make drastic changes to our lifestyles. I won't talk about states, because I know that is very difficult to get them to move, though they say that they do it for us, the people. The IPCC report does mention disability 47 times. I counted it, but it is most of it talks about daily or the disability adjusted life years, which means the burden of disease, where disabled women are concerned, not there at all. Persons with disability a few times. So what we do and we are presenting is what our learnings are from our experiences and our history. I spoke to a woman the other day and I said, I will visit your village. I live on the east coast of India where there is coastal erosion. And she said, don't come, because my village is no longer there. It had already been swept away by the sea and by the flooding that was there. So most of us, so through some generation or the other, must have been ecological refugees. We have moved where we are today after a lot of change that has come into our lives. We see ourselves today, the sea level rise, we see snow melting, we see flooding, and we see arid zones all over the globe, which affects women with disabilities tremendously, much more than others because of the poverty they find themselves in. In Paris, it was said that only 1.5 degrees should be allowed where emissions are concerned, which lead to heat waves. But what we can see that it is increasing. Where I live in India, it is said that it would increase to 3.3 to 4.8. And that will create heat to such an extent that persons with disabilities and especially women would be affected tremendously. I live on a delta, which is one of the areas where people move when they want food security for many, many years. But out of 33 deltas across the globe, 28 have been wiped out. 64,000 of area of acres has been lost. And where women with disabilities work as farmers, they have no more livelihood. And as a result, there has been immense displacement. About 30 million people displaced with 15 billion loss. That is a tremendous amount. And the agriculture loss, where 75% of women from the areas of the global south are concerned, they have lost their home, their agriculture, and no livelihood. But by 2050, 70% of food more will be needed. So where will it come from? If there is no agriculture, we do not have livelihood. And the water has decreased, and as women with disabilities have very little money, they cannot use bore wells, and that also anyway affects the climate change. So most of them have to sell gold, the only asset that they have. But we see gender roles also changing, where women with disabilities were looking after the carriage of water and keeping of water. It is now men, because the market has walked in and you have to buy water, which again affects your economy. So you can understand that if you are a woman with disability, very poor in a developing country, and you have to buy water and you have to wear, there is not enough money for food, then it becomes a challenge. So migration takes place in 2050. It is said that 200 million people will have migrated. It is called the Great Climate Migration. Many of us will be migrating, whether you are on a wheelchair or whether you cannot see, but we have to be part, and we will be part of that migration, whether we like it or no. And usually when people migrate, it leaves mostly where I live, it is men who migrate, leaving behind women. Women-headed households increase. Now, if you want to deal with climate change, then what do women with disabilities do? They did what they did on our coast. They set up cyclone shelters, which are infrastructure where they could find shelter. And all these cyclone shelters are disabled friendly. They are accessible using universal standards. There are solar dryers, there are self-help groups. But what Kairani said, I'll end with that where climate justice is, it cannot be there without the lived insights of women with disabilities. Our voices need to be included in the conversation of climate change. And that is why I'm glad that today Elena has brought this meeting about that we need to be heard, to provide that inclusive view, and the invisible spaces that we live in will come to light. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Asha. Thank you so much. I think the point about migration is something we should think about that, because we are people who have the lived experience. Actually, we are able to share and to inform the world how people with lived experience are adapting in the climate change. Now, the third panelist we are having is Ryan Bernardino. Let's welcome her. Ryan is an artist, independent curator, and researcher with a background in filmmaking. Okay, she holds an MA Fine Art degree in sculpture from the Royal College of Art, for which they were awarded the highest regarded Arab RCA Innovation Scholarship. Ryan has curated and exhibited artwork internationally, especially in Europe and Asia. There have been invited to take part in several international art residency and programs, most recently as part of the Australian Arts Council's Future Leader Program, and Office of Contemporary Arts, Norway International Visitors Program, and Tokyo Arts and Space, TOKIS, research residency in Japan. She have been doing extensive field research and mapping of art collectives, alternative space, and community-based projects across the board. In building on this work, they have been looking at the merit of possibility of working with communities through art practice in driving societal change and highlighting marginalized voices. So today we have Ryan to join us. Welcome.
Hi everyone, so happy to be here. I won't be able to show my video at this moment. I hope that's okay. I'm still recovering from COVID, so please bear with me. I didn't want to miss it, so yeah. So I'm just gonna try and see if I'm being coherent, and you can just call me out if I'm not making sense. So I would firstly want to echo what two of the panelists said before me, and how a lot of responsibility actually go to women and people who are disabled, especially, I mean, in disaster situations, especially caused by climate change. It's always the burden of survival and taking care of the family and domestic duties that fall on women and mothers and girls, and those are the ones that are also are prone to a lot of abuse and sexual abuse in trying to fulfill these duties. And I've seen it firsthand. I'm from the Philippines, just to give a bit of context, where we are hit by typhoons, like record high, like strongest typhoons now almost every year. And I've experienced this growing up, and maybe not as crazy as the ones that's been battering the country in the recent years, but the way to deal with it is really difficult, because those that are already have especially multiple marginalizations in society it doesn't get better in situations like this. Like, it's like likely 10 times more to be harder. So I think for what I want to contribute to this discussion is my one aspect of my work, when I talk about access to nature by women and POC, and people with disability, including queer people as well, because I'm queer in nature and in the countryside. Because when we talk about the environment and climate change, like it's hard to separate that from our access to nature and the issues that exist in how we embody our existence with nature. And having lived in the UK and being based in London in an urban environment, I find it, this is quite an alienating experience for me. For instance, when I go through the countryside or spend some time in nature, where I feel a high level of alienation because people of color are not usually, this is feeling of being unwelcome, and this is not the place for you in places like the UK and generally in the West, because of our invisibility in these places. So, and I think this is a conversation that we need to have, and like how this spaces and this idea of exploration is mainly attributed to a very white male experience, and there's always like this extra kind of threat of women going into nature and people of color going into nature and feeling that our invisibility gets highlighted so much that the discrimination is really heightened in these spaces. And why is that? There's a big issue in that, because nature should be neutral, isn't it? Like it doesn't judge you, but and it's also a place of refuge for people, for our mental health, and it's been proven a lot as well, especially for women. I actually read that access to nature affect women more than men, scientifically proven. So we get more benefit from spending time in nature and doing forest bathing. So our access to these spaces and openness and sense of security and should be there, and we should provide this for women, for people of color, and people with disability. So yeah, I think this is this is what I wanted to open up in this discussion, and how climate, all this it should encompass a lot of aspects of our lives. It's not just far from, in areas where there are typhoons, although they are happening now, it's flooding here and all that stuff. Like it's not just that aspects of our lives. Like this has to do with how we have that relationship with each other and the places that we belong in the natural world. So yeah, that's, I guess, the provocation that I have for this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frida. I mean, you raised something very interesting about, gender as well as disability and the connection with the forest and the nature, considering, say, forest bathing is so important, not only about the access, but also it related to our well-being, our reconnection with the nature. So I think there might be a lot of feedback or comments will be coming in when we have the discussion open floor. But before that, I would like to invite our fourth panelist to share with us. Our fourth panelist is Harrington Spencer. Harry is researcher in health active cities at the University of Salford and has just submitted her PhD in human geography at the University of Manchester. Harry's research and personal interests focus upon sustainability and inclusive active travel, and ensuring that the needs of disabled people are centralized within environmentalism. Harry is a disabled cyclist and, along with her dog Frida, uses social media to demonstrate how brilliant and inclusive cycling can be, as well as highlighting the specific barriers that disabled cyclists face in their everyday travels. Now, Harry recently has been recognized as one of the shortest Disability Power 100 for her work and activism. So welcome, Harry, to join us today.
Thank you. So to describe myself, my pronouns are she, her. I'm white British. I have shoulder-length brown hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing a green dress with pink and white stars on it. I tend to talk quite quickly when I get nervous, so Carmen, please interrupt me if I'm going too fast. So disability, gender, and the environment is something that brings together my past research with my present research. So thank you for the opportunity to start thinking through this, and I'm really honoured to be on the panel with such brilliant speakers. So my past research focused upon the gendered impacts of climate change and the predication of climate mitigation, often on women's free labour within the home. In my current work as a researcher at the University of Salford, I focus on inclusive active travel. So this is walking, wheeling by wheelchair, for example, or using a different any kind of form of mobility aid, or all the different types of cycles that are available, and also sustainable transport. This work is happening within a policy context that's focusing upon active travel to reduce transport emissions and achieve net zero necessary for meeting the responsibilities under the Paris Agreement. Within this work, I support the design and implementation of interventions to support people to travel actively and connect with public transport for longer journeys. Accessibility and inclusion is particularly important within this, as disabled people within the UK, but also more widely, are less likely to have access to a household car than non-disabled people. But disabled people are commonly spoken over and spoken for within transport discussions, not to mention common perceptions that disabled people are not and cannot be active. So my work tries to centralise disabled people's voices and needs in these discussions. I'll talk about cycling. One reason because I love cycling and that's how I get around, but also because in these discussions of active travel, cycling comes to the forefront and often comes to the forefront from a very masculine perspective in terms of confidence of cycling. So when I'm talking about cycling, I'm not talking about just two-wheel bikes. There's many different types. There's bikes, trikes, hand cycles, recumbents, wheelchair clip-ons. It can be a hugely adaptive mode of transport. But there are many gendered barriers to participating in cycling, and then these become much more enhanced when they intersect with disability. So there's the cost of adaptive cycles, which extends into thousands of pounds. Women already earn less than men in the UK, and taking into account both the disability pay gap and the disability price tag, it makes it even more difficult to afford cycles. Women are also less likely to cycle than men when there's not protected cycling infrastructure. And this becomes even harder when cycling a non-standard cycle, such as a trike, because sometimes they won't even fit into the cycle lanes, for example. Another factor is gendered and ableist abuse. As disabled women, we already experience abuse for just existing. So when we're existing in a visible way, such as cycling, this can increase the levels of abuse. I don't want to be kind of just talking about the challenges, because personally I cycle a trike and it's really helped me with my disability by staying active and also allowing me to have kind of the lower carbon lifestyle that I've really been trying to have. But when I do this, so I cycle all my local journeys, it's made me a lot more locally focused in terms of shopping and socializing. But this localization makes me consider in my work how disabled people often have much lower impact lifestyles than non-disabled people, but we tend to bear the unequal burdens from environmentalism. So the eco-labellism that Kairani was talking about and focused on the straw ban. So basically, I just want to echo other speakers in the panel as a conclusion that there is no climate justice without disability justice, and that this will need to include transport justice in it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harry. It's very interesting. I think there will be a lot more. I mean, some of our participants will be very interested to know more about, your cycling, as well as, how to live a low carbon lifestyle, especially among us. I think that will be something very interesting for us to share. I'm mindful of time, and we would like to invite everybody. If some of you would like to share or giving us some feedback, or to have a discussion, I would like to now go to we move towards the general discussion. Now, before we start having this general discussion, I would like to invite you guys to start by sharing your pronouns, and then give us your description of yourself, and then your name, your location, the interest in the topic, as well as is there any kind of feedback you guys would like to share with us. Okay, and I would like to invite everyone, if you would like to share, please raise your hand so that we can invite you. And we're mindful with the chat box too. So if anyone who do not feel like they want to share in verbally, feel free to also type your comments on the chat room. We will be able to read them too. Thank you. So anyone who would like to give some feedback? Or maybe before that, I mean, maybe some of you might need some time to prepare. Maybe I should start first as the chair. I mean, Asha, actually, you mentioned a lot of interesting, I mean, there are some issues that related to climate change making an impact on disabled women in the developing country, considering the safety of water, the clean water is making a very big impact, isn't it? How does, I mean, in that situation, what kind of things that we can do, or is there anything government or even UN, what can we do to advocate so that, I mean, disabled women, I mean, the clean water or even climate change impact can lessen the impact on disabled people?
Thank you, Carmen. I think the first thing that we need to do is the IPCC is coming out with a gender report. And I think we should tell them to include women with disabilities, because I'm sure they're not going to do so. I have written to them, but on a larger scale as a group, if we write, it would make a change. And that means that the UNFC, all of them would be paying attention to it. The second is that since in the developing countries, it's not only India, it's in the Philippines, I'm sure, and it's in Indonesia, the same situation with water is there, it is declining, and we need to conserve. And there are methods of conservation in climate change, and that is what we need to adopt, that water has to be conserved. There is no other way. But even then, if the rain variability is there and the rain does not come on time, as it's not coming now, then the situation is still very difficult. So the only thing that can be done is on a large, massive scale. We need to bring this to the attention of governments and to the people involved in that, in conservation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asha. I mean, based on research and article, it do mention that, because of climate change and also a lot of, unexpected, environmental crisis and issue, disabled people do faces a lot of challenges in having adaptive lifestyle, and that will create a lot of different kind of challenges as well. So I guess that will be related to some of the questions that we see from the chat box. That will be related to how do environmental issues affect disabled people, in particular disabled women. So I do believe Asha did mention and try to explain that. How about the other question is, can anyone share experience in their own countries of the effects that has on disabled women? Is there anyone or any panelists can share that with us? Yes, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this to attention because it's not really talked a lot about, and maybe it's also important to raise it in this discussion, like how women's reproductive health is actually a conversation that people don't talk about in disaster situations and especially when typhoons hit disaster hit areas where women tend to sacrifice, not struggling to have access to sanitary products, for instance, and it becomes like a non-important priority when you have to have food and water for your family, and also access to protection, reproductive health issues, where a lot of women and girls are sexually abused as well in these situations. And there's a lot of high pregnancy level that happens in families because of lack of support for reproductive health. So maybe along with water, which is essential, but sanitary products is also important, and reproductive health of women is also important, and how this should be included in that discussion, and especially more so with disabled women.
And
Thank you so much, Ryan. I mean, related to sanitary, products that related to disabled women, I think that is something we work to think about that as well. Imagine a lot of this design actually might be in the perspective of able-bodied. They seldom think about, how does this new, I mean, I do aware that there are more sanitary products that are more, environmental friendly, but it seems like the new products designed might not consider disabled women, isn't it? So maybe these are some issues that we could also raise. I see there are several hands that's been raising up. Maybe shall I invite Kirsty to share with us? Thank you.
Hi, somebody's messaged me a question which I'd like to put towards which I'd like to put to panelists, touching up on the topics of climate change and its specific impacts on women and people with disabilities. Do you think that planetary health should become a feminist issue? I don't know if anyone who's spoken wants to kind of respond to this comment.
Oh, Oka seems to have a feedback, so maybe we could invite Oka to share with us.
Well, thank you, Kirsty, and thank you, Carmen. Yeah, I just wanted to say that going along with understanding longer histories of environmental struggle, I think in places like Indonesia and the Philippines, environmental justice has always been a women's issue. You have always seen, like village women, farmer women, indigenous women at the front lines of resisting environmental destruction. It already is a feminist issue, and with the feminization of poverty, adding to all these factors that we have all talked about, impacting women disproportionately and disabled women even more. And if I'll just add one thing that I wanted to say earlier is that judging by how disabled women have been treated during this COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, in the UK, we're 6 times more likely to die. And over 60% of the people who've died from the COVID-19 pandemic have been disabled. So it's a genocide. It is a genocide of disabled and ill people, especially women. I want to say that in looking at scientific projections for how infectious diseases will rise as a result of climate change, I really think that disabled women's voices in particular have to be taken into account, because a lot of us have comorbidity. A lot of us already have the symptoms associated with things like COVID, and we cannot afford to, risk death or further disability by a rise in infectious diseases. So that's just something I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. Okay, I mean, you're raising another issues that related to COVID-19, and considering that not only COVID-19, imagine that climate change is not only about, a few specific countries or places, isn't it? It's related to the globally. Imagine, for the past few years, there's been a lot of, environmental crisis. Imagine like tsunami, like earthquake, and these sort of things. And we can see, according to research, that people with disabilities usually are the ones who suffered and struggles most. So you did raise a very, important issues, and I think one of the things that we've been thinking about is how we can help. I mean, through the advocacy with you and as well as countries, how we can facilitate the kind of adaptive behaviors or solutions to support people with disabilities to face this sort of climate change and environmental crisis. I think these are important issues. So there are one more questions I probably would like to see if the panel can respond to us is that, so we've been talking about families as well. So is there any way that we could work together to, to create a bigger voice by, generating and, collaborating together to talk about and share the lived experience of disabled women related to this area? Is there anyone who would like to have a feedback how we can work together to share or to empower, the lived experience so that we can make an advocacy or social change? Anyone would like to share? Or Harry, would you like to share with us? I mean, I know that you've been doing a lot of work with, disabled cycling, and then you've been sharing a lot of lifestyle with, social media and advocacy. Is there any way that we can do to, to empower more people or to facilitate more people to join the kind of lifestyle you have?
Yeah, I'm always a bit, I wouldn't call it a lifestyle. I just, and I wouldn't even say it's not just about trying to get disabled people cycling, for example. It's because there's cross benefits of it as well in terms of social mobility. But I use social media a lot, and actually I think that comes a lot from both the pandemic and also having low energy, as I find social media is and Twitter in particular, I found really helpful in terms of connecting with a wider group of people. So I don't know if there's downsides of social media, but for me, I found it really helpful in connecting with the disabled community, both in terms of active travel, but in finishing my PhD as well, in having that disabled student community was really important to me.
Thank you so much. I think it's really important to, build the network together and stay connection with the disabled community. Well, I just want to raise that there is a feedback in the chat room from Maya saying that, we are aware that many of you guys might be members of the International Network of Women with Disabilities, but others who would like to join the community and join us, and there is the information where you can click on the links and apply for membership in this group. And Maya will send you information on how to join our list. And we do welcome women with disabilities as well as allied women to join us. So there are several more comments and feedback, and Maya, would you like to share or would you like to speak to us as well?
Thank you, and thanks for this fantastic panel, especially in the context of CSW. It's really important that women with disabilities are visible here, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Yes, I thank you for reading out what I wrote in the chat about the International Network of Women with Disabilities. And I just wanted to encourage people to join us and to think about how we can network together to help each other in this context. It's not something that the network, I call it INWWD, INNWWD, or INWWD, sorry. I call it INWWD. Anyway, INWWD has not focused yet on climate change, and Asha, I already texted with her directly, but yes, the more that we can work together, the more likely we are to be successful. And this is a venue, the INWWD is a venue where this can happen. So please, anyone who is interested, you're welcome to join us, and we appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you so much. There is a note in the chat box that I want to read it for everybody so that you guys know. It's from Nick, because Nick shared that it's very interesting talk from the panel. There are two questions and thoughts. Okay, the first one is regarding to the comments on active travel. It's important to remember that that isn't an option for all disabled people. People with energy disability cannot cycle with their arms and any more than their legs. So it's important to campaign for access to power wheelchairs and mobility scooters, and for access for things like solar panels to help the cost of charging this. In addition, in the UK's most CCGS do not offer power wheelchair to most disabled people, meaning that people like like Nick, who can walk a bit but cannot walk the 400 meters to the nearest bus stop, is forced to drive. Finally, in the UK, buses are still not accessible for most mobility scooters, limiting the greenways these disabled people can travel. Now, the second feedback is about the other main equal ableism. So Nick have accounted is the lack of understanding that not everyone can go vegan. I have even mentioned this in inclusive event for environmental organization, only for, that they have tried. So I would like to invite if any panel would like to give any feedback on this area as well. I think while we are waiting for our panelists might have some feedback, I think Nick raised a very interesting issue about the accessibility to the nature, isn't it? So Harry, I see you raise your hand. Would you like to share with us?
Yeah, I completely agree with Nick that we do, and we are trying to advocate for that. I think there's also each person only has a limited amount of what they can do as well. So whilst my work focuses on kind of inclusive active travel, it has to be limited to some extent. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on. But there is some excellent work going on, especially around transport in London and things like only being able to have one wheelchair user use a bus at a time, where, you know, what if you want to go out with your friends? So it's about the sociality of that as well, and not just about it being a transport practice. So that is coming out from other people. But yeah, it's always something that's in my mind.
Thank you so much, Harry. I mean, when we talk about accessibility to the nature, I guess there are several areas that we should also look at, beside of, having a smooth pathway that will, for, wheelchair users, or even walking, route that is safe for people with visual impairment as well. Another issue about accessibility, we should be looking to the public transport. How does people can travel to this nature? These are important issues. So just to share with you about, yes, the transportation. Right now, what we are having is probably just one space for wheelchair user. But in some places, like in Hong Kong or Asia countries, these buses actually have re-renovate, and they could spare 2 wheelchair space officially for each bus, especially for buses that traveling to country area or even the farther nature. So there are a lot of different kind of work that we can do in lobbying to address the needs, so that we can continue with working on, how we can interject disabled people's voices into the advocacy for climate change and environmental friendly. So I am mindful of time as we've been late starting, and thank you so much for everyone for staying with us today. So what we will do afterwards is we will be sending a post-event email with some of our reading and information, and some useful information and kit for you guys to take a look. And as Maya said, if there's a lots of way of staying in touch and connection with the community with disabled women. So please do join us. And again, I would like to thank you, our interpreters, for all the hard work tonight. Sam and Nikki, thank you so much. And thank you so much, everybody, for attending this event. Thank you.
Thank you,
Before,
Carmen.
before everyone logs off quickly, sorry, it's Kirsty talking. Would it be possible for everyone to pop their cameras on? It would be really great to get a final picture. But thank you again. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Eleanor, and thank you very much, Carmen, for chairing. But if everyone could pop their cameras on, and I'll do a quick screenshot. If you don't, that's completely fine too. Great. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And bye.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.